I sat there at my own birthday table, surrounded by 16 strange faces I'd never met, my son's coworkers. They laughed, chattered, and passed the bread basket like I was invisible. He told me later I was too boring to invite actual friends, so this was their way of saving face. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret. I'm 72 years old, and for the past decade, I've lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on North Clark Street in Chicago. The walls are thin enough that I can hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television through the plaster, and every morning at 6:15, the L train rattles past my window like an old friend clearing his throat. I used to find it annoying. Now, it's the most reliable company I have. My days had become a blur of slow mornings, haunted by the distant clatter of that train and the smell of old takeout containers stacked in corners, because I'd forgotten how to cook for just one person. For years, I cooked elaborate Sunday dinners, Thanksgiving feasts, birthday cakes with hand-piped roses. But those days felt like someone else's life now. Most afternoons, I handled my son David's errands, picking up his dry cleaning from the shop on Lincoln Avenue, depositing checks at the bank because he was too busy, cleaning the crumbs off my kitchen counter from meals I'd prepared that went unthanked and barely touched. I waited for phone calls that rarely came. When they did, they were requests disguised as conversation. Mom, could you pick up some groceries for us? Mom, can you babysit this weekend? Mom, I need you to transfer some money. Never. Mom, how are you feeling? Never. Mom, I've been thinking about you. That Tuesday evening in March, when I saw those unfamiliar faces crowding around my small dining table, straining to be polite while they devoured the pot roast I'd spent all day preparing, I caught a whisper of betrayal cold enough to freeze Lake Michigan in January. David had invited his entire office team, people who didn't know my name, who called me David's mom, with that distant politeness reserved for strangers you're forced to acknowledge. I remember standing in my kitchen doorway, watching them laugh at jokes I couldn't hear, passing around the mashed potatoes I'd whipped by hand because I wanted everything perfect for my 72nd birthday. My birthday, the one day of the year that was supposed to be mine. And there I was, invisible in my own home, serving people who wouldn't remember my face the next day. After they left, after they'd eaten every last dinner roll and scraped clean the apple pie I'd baked from scratch, David finally looked at me. Really looked at me. His eyes held that mixture of impatience and pity I'd grown to recognize over the years. Mom, he said, loosening his tie like he was preparing for an unpleasant conversation. I thought this would be good for you. You know, meeting new people. You've gotten so, so boring lately. I couldn't think of anyone else to invite. Boring. The word hit me like a physical blow. I thought of the photograph on my mantelpiece, his angelic face as a 7-year-old boy, cuddled in my lap after a nightmare, his tiny hands wrapped around my finger like I was his whole world. His smile had been so bright then, so full of love and trust. Where had that sun gone? When had I become too boring for my own birthday party? I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and the lingering scent of strangers' perfume, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, just crack. Like ice on the lake when spring starts to come. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city breathe around me. Sirens in the distance, the rumble of late-night buses, the couple upstairs arguing about money again. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me what I wanted for my birthday, or what I dreamed about, or if I was happy. I'd spent so many years being what everyone needed me to be. The dependable mother, the walking wallet, the built-in babysitter, the woman who said yes to everything and asked for nothing in return. I'd forgotten there was supposed to be a person underneath all those roles. But that night, lying in the dark with my son's words echoing in my head, something began to shift. Something that had been sleeping for too long started to wake up. Let me tell you about the years that led up to that moment. The years of giving everything I had and watching it disappear into the endless appetite of other people's needs. It started when David was 25 and lost his job at the marketing firm downtown. I remember the phone call. It was a Thursday in November. and I was making soup for dinner. Something simple and warm because the first snow was falling, and I knew winter would be hard on my fixed income. The phone rang, and his voice was small and scared, like he was 8 years old again. Mom, they let me go. Budget cuts. I don't know what I'm going to do about rent. Without thinking, I reached for my checkbook. I'd been saving for months, putting aside $20 or $30 when I could, dreaming of maybe taking a small trip somewhere warm, maybe Florida. I'd never seen the ocean. Instead, I sent him $800, then another $600 the next month, then $500 the month after that, because job hunting was taking longer than expected, and he had expenses, and he was my son, my only son. Mom, you're too generous, he'd say when the checks arrived. Generous. The word used to make me feel good. Now I wonder if he meant something else entirely. Did generous mean foolish? Did it mean there was no limit to what he could take? When he finally found another job, the requests didn't stop. They just changed shape. Mom, I need a suit for this interview. Mom, my car needs new tires. Mom, Sarah's pregnant, and we need help with the security deposit on a bigger apartment. Always urgent. Always necessary. Always my responsibility somehow. I worked as a secretary at a law firm for 37 years. I was good at my job. Organized. Reliable. The kind of person attorneys trusted with their schedules and their secrets. I saved what I could. Lived modestly. Dreamed small dreams that felt appropriate for a woman of my station. I never asked for much. Maybe that was my first mistake. When I retired, my savings weren't much by most standards. But they felt like security to me, a small cushion against uncertainty, a promise that I wouldn't be a burden to anyone in my old age. I was proud of that nest egg, modest as it was. I'd earned every dollar of it. But somehow, over the years, those savings began to disappear. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they bled away slowly. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, always for something important. David's wedding, the grandchildren's school expenses, Sarah's medical bills. Home repairs for the house I couldn't afford but helped them buy anyway. I remember the winter when David's second child was born. Little Emma, with her perfect tiny fingers and that sweet baby smell that makes you remember why the world feels worth saving. Sarah had complications after the delivery and they needed help. Not just financial help, but physical presence. Someone to cook and clean and hold the baby while Sarah recovered and David tried to keep up with work. So I moved in with them for 6 weeks. I slept on their uncomfortable sofa, my back aching every morning, and spent my days washing bottles and folding tiny clothes and trying to stay out of the way while still being useful. I loved that baby with a fierce tenderness that surprised me. But David and Sarah, they treated me like hired help. Polite hired help, but help nonetheless. Margaret, could you start dinner? Sarah would call from the bedroom, not even using the word, please. Margaret, Emma needs changing. Margaret, we're out of diapers again. Never, Mom. Never, thank you. Just Margaret, like I was someone they'd found in the phone book. When I finally went home to my apartment, I felt relief mixed with a sadness I couldn't name. I'd helped my family through a crisis, but I felt more alone than ever. And my bank account was lighter by several $1,000s. Groceries and supplies and little expenses that added up faster than I could track. But I told myself it meant love. Sacrifice means love, doesn't it? That's what mothers do. We give until it hurts, and then we give some more, because that's how you know it's real. The pattern continued. David would call with problems, car trouble, work stress, marriage difficulties. And somehow each conversation ended with me opening my purse or my heart or both. I became the family ATM, the permanent solution to temporary problems that never seemed to get permanently solved. I started recognizing the tone in his voice when he called. That particular careful cheerfulness that meant he needed something. The way he'd ask about my health and my day before slowly steering the conversation toward his latest crisis. I could predict the arc of those phone calls like a weatherman predicting rain. How are you doing, Mom? You sound tired. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just the usual aches and pains. You should take better care of yourself. Maybe eat out more. Treat yourself. Oh, you know me. I'm fine with simple food at home. Actually, Mom, that reminds me. Sarah's been so stressed about money lately. The kids need new shoes and the car registration is due, and by the end of the call, I'd be promising to transfer money I couldn't really afford to lose. And David would sound genuinely grateful, which made me feel useful and needed and less like the foolish old woman I sometimes feared I was becoming. The worst part was how naturally it all happened. How easy it was to slip from being a mother into being a resource. Somewhere along the way, my love had become a currency, and the exchange rate was always in their favor. I remember one particularly cold February morning when I was sick with the flu. I'd been in bed for 3 days, barely able to keep soup down, dizzy every time I stood up. The apartment felt like a cave, dark and stuffy and filled with the kind of silence that makes you conscious of your own breathing. I called David, not to ask for anything, but just to hear another human voice, to have someone know I was struggling. "Oh, Mom, that's terrible," he said when I told him how sick I'd been. "You should really take better care of yourself. Maybe you should see a doctor." "I probably should," I agreed, hoping he might offer to drive me or at least check on me later. "Well, listen, I can't talk long because we're dealing with a crisis here. Emma fell off her bike and we think she might need stitches. Sarah's at work and can't leave, so I have to handle this alone. It's such bad timing." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Mom, do you think you could lend us $300 for the emergency room copay? I know you're sick, but we're really strapped right now." I was so feverish I could barely think straight, but I agreed without hesitation. Because that's what mothers do, right? We put our children first, no matter what. Later that evening, feeling slightly better after some tea and rest, I called to check on Emma. David's voice was bright and relieved. "Oh, she's fine. Just a small cut, no stitches needed. Kids bounce back so fast at that age." We actually ended up going out for ice cream afterward to celebrate her being brave. Ice cream, with the $300 I'd transferred while I was too sick to make myself soup. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Cold and persistent as the Chicago wind that finds its way through every crack in these old buildings. Was I being used? Were my generosity and my love just convenient solutions to problems that would get solved some other way if I weren't available? But then I'd remember David as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees and broken toys, his absolute faith that Mommy could fix anything. I'd remember the way he used to fall asleep in my arms, completely trusting and peaceful. That love was real. It had to be real. So I pushed down the doubt and kept giving. Because what's the alternative? What kind of mother stops helping her child? What kind of person puts a price tag on love? The years blurred together in a haze of requests and responses, needs and solutions. My savings dwindled. My social life, which had never been extensive, faded to nothing as I spent my weekends babysitting and my evenings listening to other people's problems. My own problems, the arthritis in my hands, the loneliness that sat in my chest like a stone, the growing fear that I was disappearing into my usefulness. Those problems became background noise. I stopped buying new clothes because there was always something more important to spend money on. I stopped going to movies or restaurants because every dollar saved was a dollar I could give to someone who needed it more. I stopped dreaming about travel or hobbies or any kind of life that was just for me, because that felt selfish when other people had real problems. And through it all, David remained friendly but distant, grateful but casual. He loved me, I was sure of that, but it was the kind of love you have for a reliable appliance. Useful, expected, taken for granted until it breaks down. The phone calls became more demanding, the emergencies more frequent, and my ability to say no disappeared so completely that I sometimes wondered if I'd ever had it at all. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but could you co-sign for a car loan? My credit isn't quite good enough on its own." "Mom, we're thinking about refinancing the house, but we need some cash for closing costs." "Mom, Sarah wants to go back to school, but we'd need help with childcare costs." Always presented as temporary solutions. Always with promises of payback that never quite materialized. Always with that underlying assumption that of course I would help, because what else was I good for? The worst part wasn't the money, though watching my life savings evaporate was painful enough. The worst part was the growing realization that I'd become invisible as a person. I existed only in relation to other people's needs. I was David's mother, Sarah's mother-in-law, the children's grandmother, but I wasn't Margaret anymore. I wasn't a woman with her own hopes and fears and dreams. I was a function, a service, a problem-solving device that happened to live in an apartment on North Clark Street and answer the phone when people needed something. And maybe, I started to think in my darkest moments, that's all I'd ever been. Do you know what it feels like to suspect that your own love has been turned into a weapon against you? To wonder if the people you care about most see you as nothing more than an open wallet and a willing heart? It feels like drowning in shallow water. It feels like starving at a feast you've prepared for everyone else. But I kept going, because what choice did I have? This was my family. This was love. This was what I'd signed up for when I became a mother 43 years ago. Until that birthday party. Until those 16 strangers eating my food and ignoring my existence while my son called me boring to justify his own lack of consideration. That was the moment something inside me finally said, enough. The microaggressions had been building for years, like sediment in a river. So gradual I barely noticed until the accumulated weight threatened to drown me. It was in the way David would answer his phone when I called, that barely perceptible sigh before his cheerful, "Hey, Mom." It was in how he'd put me on speaker without asking, so I'd be talking to an empty room while he multitasked. It was in the way he'd cut our conversations short if they weren't immediately relevant to his needs. "Mom, I've got to run. We're just sitting down to dinner," he'd say. Even though it was the first time we'd spoken in 2 weeks and I'd called because I was feeling particularly lonely. It was in the way Sarah would roll her eyes when she thought I couldn't see, or how she'd redirect conversations away from my interests and experiences. Once I tried to tell her about a book I'd enjoyed, and she literally yawned and said, "That sounds nice, Margaret," before immediately changing the subject to her own problems at work. It was in the way my grandchildren were taught to be polite to me but never warm. They'd hug me when prompted and thank me for gifts with the mechanical courtesy of well-trained performers. But there was no real connection, no spontaneous affection, no sense that I was anyone special to them beyond being the old lady who showed up with presents. I started to notice how rarely anyone asked my opinion about anything that mattered. Family decisions were made around me, not with me. Vacation plans, school choices for the children, major purchases. I'd hear about these things after they were decided, usually in the context of how much they'd cost and whether I might be able to help financially. My birthdays became increasingly perfunctory. A generic card picked up at the last minute, maybe a phone call if they remembered, but more often a text message with those impersonal birthday wishes that could have been sent to anyone. "Hope you have a great day." No mention of specific memories we shared or hopes for the year ahead. Nothing that acknowledged me as an individual person with a unique relationship to them. Last year, when I turned 71, I waited all day for someone to remember. I'd mentioned it the week before when David called asking for money to fix their washing machine. "Oh, that's next week? Great, Mom. We'll figure something out." But the day came and went in complete silence. No calls, no visits, no cards in the mail. Just me and the L train and a store-bought cupcake I ate while watching the evening news. When I finally called David 3 days later, not to complain, just to see how everyone was doing, he was genuinely surprised to learn he'd missed it. "Oh God, Mom. I'm so sorry. This week has been absolutely crazy. Sarah's mom was visiting and work has been insane, and the kids both had this stomach bug." A litany of reasons why I didn't matter enough to remember. He promised to make it up to me, but of course he never did. The promise itself was supposed to be enough, I suppose. The gesture toward caring without the inconvenience of actually having to care. But it was the small daily neglects that cut deepest. The way no one ever called just to chat. The way my health problems became conversational inconveniences to be processed as quickly as possible. "Oh, your back is acting up again? Maybe you should see a doctor about that." Anyway, speaking of doctors, Emma needs to see a specialist and we're trying to figure out how to afford it. I had surgery to remove a small growth from my shoulder 2 years ago. Nothing serious, but I was nervous and would have appreciated some company at the hospital. When I mentioned it to David, he said, "Oh, that's the same day as Jake's soccer tournament. Sarah already took time off work for it, but you'll be fine, right? It's outpatient?" I went alone. I sat in the waiting room among strangers, filled out all the forms with my shaky handwriting, and woke up in recovery with no familiar face to greet me. The nurse asked if someone was coming to pick me up, and I lied and said my son was on his way. Instead, I took a taxi home and spent the evening alone with my bandaged shoulder and a prescription pain medication that made me nauseous. David called 3 days later to check on me, but it felt obligatory rather than caring. "How did the surgery go? Good? Great. Listen, I'm glad I caught you because I wanted to ask about something." Always a transition to what he actually wanted to discuss. Always a sense that my well-being was a box to be checked before moving on to more important matters. The pattern extended to every interaction we had. If I mentioned feeling tired, he'd make a brief sympathetic noise before launching into complaints about his own exhaustion. If I talked about something that interested me, a news story, a book, a memory, he'd deflect it back to himself or his family within minutes. I began to understand that I existed in his mind only in relation to his needs. When he needed money, I was the generous mother. When he needed babysitting, I was the available grandmother. When he needed someone to listen to his problems, I was the sympathetic ear. But there was no space in his mental picture of me for my own independent existence. I started to test this theory, in small ways. I'd mention feeling worried about something and see if he'd ask follow-up questions. He rarely did. I'd share good news about something in my life and notice how quickly he'd change the subject. I'd express an opinion that differed from his and watch him dismiss it without really listening. The loneliness of being so fundamentally unseen by the person you love most in the world is a special kind of hell. It's worse than being actively disliked, because at least that acknowledges your existence as a separate person worth having feelings about. This was more like being treated as a piece of furniture that occasionally made sounds. And then came that awful discovery that shattered even my carefully managed expectations. It was a Thursday afternoon in February. I'd gone to David's house to watch the kids while Sarah had a dentist appointment. These babysitting sessions had become routine. I'd show up whenever needed, occupy the children, clean up their messes, and disappear again without expecting thanks or recognition. David was working from home that day, taking calls in his home office while I managed snack time and homework help. At one point, Emma spilled juice on his laptop bag, and he asked me to clean it out while he dealt with a work crisis. I was wiping down the inside of the bag when I found a folder of receipts. Nothing suspicious about that. I'd helped with their finances enough times to be familiar with their paperwork. But something made me look closer. Maybe it was the restaurant name I recognized but had never been to. Maybe it was the amounts that seemed too high for a family constantly asking me for money to cover basic expenses. There were dozens of receipts. Expensive dinners at steakhouses downtown, bar tabs from trendy cocktail lounges, tickets to concerts and sporting events, shopping sprees at stores I couldn't afford to browse in, a weekend getaway to Wisconsin that cost more than my monthly rent. All of this while they'd been telling me about their tight budget and their struggles to make ends meet. All of this funded by money I'd been sending them for emergencies and unexpected expenses. My hands started shaking as I flipped through the evidence of their deception. $150 for dinner on the same weekend they'd asked me for money to cover their electric bill. $300 on baseball tickets during the month they said they couldn't afford Emma's school supplies. A $700 shopping trip to some boutique on Michigan Avenue right after I'd sent them money for Jake's orthodontist appointments. I felt sick. Not just angry or hurt, but physically nauseous. Like I'd been poisoned. All those times they'd described their financial stress while asking for my help, they'd been lying. Not exaggerating or being dramatic. Actively, deliberately lying while spending my retirement money on luxuries they wanted but couldn't afford. How long had this been going on? How many times had David called me with manufactured crises while planning his next expensive entertainment? How many times had I denied myself small pleasures so I could help with necessary expenses that turned out to be nothing more than subsidies for their lifestyle? I sat there in their expensive kitchen, surrounded by granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that I'd helped them buy, holding evidence of the contempt they had for my intelligence. And my love. They thought I was too stupid or too desperate to notice. They thought my affection made me an easy mark. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been exactly that stupid and desperate. When David came back downstairs, I was still sitting at the kitchen table with the receipts spread in front of me. He saw them immediately, and I watched his face cycle through surprise, worry, and finally a kind of defiant annoyance that told me everything I needed to know. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm and cold. I barely recognized it. "Those receipts. Some of them are old, and some of them are work-related. We get reimbursed for some things, and I picked up a receipt from the previous weekend. A place called the Purple Pig, downtown. Drinks and appetizers for 4 people. $237, not including tip." This was 3 days after he'd called asking for money to cover their grocery bill. "Work-related?" I repeated. The Purple Pig sounds like a very professional establishment for a business dinner. The sarcasm felt foreign in my mouth, but also liberating. When had I ever spoken to him with anything other than gentle acceptance? "Look, Mom, I know how this looks, but you don't understand how stressful things have been. We needed a break. We work hard, and sometimes we need to blow off steam. That doesn't mean we don't have real expenses, too. But you asked me for grocery money the day before this dinner. That was different. That was, look, our finances are complicated. You wouldn't understand." Wouldn't understand. As if I were a child who couldn't grasp basic arithmetic. As if the woman who'd balanced her own budget for 7 decades and helped them with their finances countless times was too simple to notice that their desperate need for grocery money coincided perfectly with their ability to spend $200 on cocktails. "David," I said, and something in my tone made him stop his explanations and actually look at me. "How long have you been lying to me?" "I haven't been lying." "How long have you been taking money from me for expenses you didn't have while spending my help on things you didn't need?" The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. I could hear the children playing upstairs, their innocent voices a sharp contrast to the ugliness of this moment. I could hear Sarah's car pulling into the driveway, back from her dentist appointment that I was probably helping to pay for while they funded their entertainment budget with my retirement savings. "It's not like that," David finally said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "What is it like?" Another silence. Then, "Mom, you want to help. You've always wanted to help. I'm letting you help." The audacity of that statement took my breath away. He was letting me help. As if I should be grateful for the opportunity to be deceived and taken advantage of. As if my love for him was a favor I was doing myself rather than a gift I was giving him. I stood up carefully, my arthritis making the movement slow and deliberate. I folded the receipts and put them in my purse. David watched this with growing alarm. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving." "You can't just leave. Sarah will be back any minute and she's expecting you to stay until—" "I can't?" The children were calling for me from upstairs, probably wanting a snack or help with something. For a moment, the old habit of responsibility tugged at me. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just children caught in the middle of adult deceptions. But I kept walking toward the door. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was putting my own needs first. Not out of spite or anger, but out of something deeper and more fundamental. A recognition that I couldn't keep disappearing into other people's lives without losing myself completely. "Mom, please don't make this into a big drama. Can't we just talk about this like adults?" I turned back to look at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who thought that taking advantage of my generosity was somehow my fault for offering it. Who believed that my hurt feelings were the real problem here, rather than his lies and exploitation. "Drama?" I said. "You think discovering that my son has been systematically lying to me and stealing from me is drama? I never stole anything from you. Every penny you gave us, you gave voluntarily. Under false pretenses. You wanted to help. You always want to help. If I'd told you we wanted money for dinner out, you would have said no, but you were happy to help with groceries. What's the difference? What's the difference? As if honesty were just a technicality. As if my right to make informed decisions about my own money were just an inconvenient obstacle to getting what he wanted." I looked at him for a long moment, trying to find some trace of the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to tell me I was the best mommy in the whole world. But all I could see was a middle-aged man who'd learned to use my love as a tool to get what he wanted. "The difference," I said, "is that one is love and the other is theft." I left him standing in his expensive kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd helped him buy, and walked out into the cold February afternoon. The wind off the lake hit my face like a slap, but it felt clean and sharp and honest in a way I hadn't experienced in years. That night, I sat in my small apartment and cried. Not the gentle tears of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to, but the desperate, wrenching sobs of someone whose world has fundamentally shifted. Everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son had been built on lies. Every conversation we'd had about money had been a performance designed to manipulate me. How many times had he practiced that worried tone of voice? How many times had he and Sarah discussed the best way to approach me for funds? Had they laughed about how easy I was to fool? Did they call me names behind my back? The sucker? The easy touch? The desperate old woman who'd pay any price for the illusion of being needed? I felt like such a fool. All those years of pride in my generous heart, in my willingness to sacrifice for my family, in the way I could always be counted on to help in a crisis, it had all been a joke at my expense, but underneath the humiliation and betrayal, something else was growing, something that felt almost like relief. For the first time in years, I saw the situation clearly. Without the fog of obligation and guilt and desperate love clouding my judgment, I could see exactly what had been happening to me. I hadn't been helping my family through difficult times. I'd been enabling their selfishness while they systematically drained my resources and my dignity. I'd been so afraid of being selfish, so determined to prove my love through constant giving, that I'd forgotten I had the right to expect basic honesty and respect in return. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do, but I knew with absolute certainty that things were going to change. I was going to stop being convenient. I was going to stop being taken for granted. I was going to remember that I was a person, not a resource. The next morning, my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different somehow. The same wrinkles, the same gray hair, the same tired eyes. But there was something new there too. A spark of defiance that had been missing for so long I'd forgotten what it looked like. I made coffee, good coffee, the expensive kind I usually saved for special occasions, and sat down to think about my life. Really think about it. Maybe for the first time in decades. Who was I when I wasn't being needed by someone else? What did I want that had nothing to do with making other people happy? When was the last time I'd done something purely for my own pleasure? The answers were harder to find than I expected. I'd been other-focused for so long that my own desires felt foreign and selfish. But as I sat there sipping my coffee and listening to the familiar sound of the L train, I began to remember small things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I used to love reading mystery novels. I used to enjoy walking through Lincoln Park Zoo on sunny afternoons. I used to dream about taking a cooking class, learning to make something just because I wanted to learn, not because someone else needed to be fed. Such small dreams, but they felt revolutionary after years of having no dreams at all. The phone rang around 10 o'clock, David's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Hi, Mom, it's me. Listen, I've been thinking about yesterday, and I think we both got a little heated. Why don't we just put it behind us? I know you're upset, but like I said, it's not as bad as it looks. Anyway, Sarah wanted me to ask if you could watch the kids this Saturday afternoon. We have this work thing we can't get out of. Call me back, okay?" I stared at the phone in disbelief. After everything that had happened, after the discovery of his lies and the confrontation and my clear statement that I felt stolen from, his primary concern was whether I'd still be available for free babysitting. He thought he could wave away my hurt feelings with a casual dismissal and then immediately ask for another favor. He thought my anger was just a minor inconvenience that could be managed like any other obstacle to getting what he wanted. The old me would have called him back within the hour. The old me would have convinced herself that preserving the relationship mattered more than standing up for myself. The old me would have shown up on Saturday with a smile and snacks and pretended nothing had happened. But something had broken inside me yesterday, and it wasn't going to be easily repaired. I didn't call him back. Saturday came and went without a word from me. On Sunday evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. "Margaret? Hi, it's Sarah. I think there might have been some kind of misunderstanding about yesterday. We waited for you, but you never showed up." The kids were really disappointed. The kids were disappointed. as if my failure to appear as expected were a personal betrayal of my grandchildren rather than a natural consequence of their parents' behavior. There was no misunderstanding, I said. David asked me to babysit, and I chose not to. Oh, a pause. Well, that put us in a really difficult position. We had to find a last-minute sitter, and it cost us $60. $60. Less than a quarter of what they'd spent on cocktails the night before asking me for grocery money. I'm sorry you were inconvenienced, I said, and meant it, but I wasn't available. Margaret, is this about those receipts? Because David explained the situation to me, and I think you're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. We've never asked you for anything we didn't really need. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired the skill of it. Turn my reasonable anger into unreasonable drama. Make me the problem for having feelings about being lied to and taken advantage of. Suggest that my memory or my judgment couldn't be trusted. Sarah, I said, you asked me for grocery money and then spent more than twice that amount on dinner out the same weekend. If that's not lying, what is? It's complicated. You don't understand the whole situation. There it was again. I couldn't understand. Too simple. Too old. Too naive to grasp the complexities of their sophisticated lives. I understand enough, I said. I understand that honesty used to be considered a basic part of family relationships. Look, I don't want to fight about this. Why don't you come over for dinner next week and we can all talk this through like civilized people? Civilized people. As if I were the one who'd been behaving badly. As if wanting honesty from my family were somehow uncivilized. I don't think so, I said. Margaret, you're being ridiculous. We're family. Yes, I said. We are. And that's what makes this so sad. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling simultaneously emptied out and strangely energized. For the first time in years, I'd set a boundary and maintained it despite pressure to give in. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Over the next few weeks, the calls continued. Sometimes from David, sometimes from Sarah, occasionally from my ex-husband who'd apparently been brought in to mediate. The tone varied, pleading, angry, manipulative, reasonable. But the underlying message was always the same. I was being unreasonably difficult, and I needed to get over my hurt feelings and return to normal. Normal. The word made me laugh, though not with humor. Normal was me giving everything and getting nothing back. Normal was me being lied to and manipulated and expected to be grateful for the privilege. Normal was me disappearing a little more each day until there was nothing left of Margaret, just a collection of services provided to people who couldn't be bothered to see me as fully human. I didn't want normal anymore. The hardest part was the loneliness. Cutting off contact with David and Sarah meant cutting off contact with my grandchildren too, at least for now. I missed them with a physical ache that sometimes made it hard to breathe, but I couldn't see how to maintain a relationship with them without subjecting myself to their parents' continued exploitation and disrespect. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Patricia Chen had an office in a converted Victorian house on Damen Avenue, and her gentle voice and intelligent questions helped me begin to untangle years of confused thinking about love and sacrifice and family obligation. It sounds like you equated your worth with your usefulness, she said during one of our early sessions. When people stopped needing you, you felt like you stopped mattering. Didn't I? I asked. I mean, what else do I have to offer? I'm not particularly interesting or accomplished. I'm just an old woman with some savings and time on her hands. Do you really believe that? Or is that what you've been told to believe? The question stayed with me for weeks. Had I always seen myself as uninteresting? Or had that been a gradual process of erosion? When had I stopped believing I had value beyond my willingness to give? Slowly, piece by piece, I started to reconstruct some sense of myself as an individual. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I'd always been curious about, but never had time to try. I joined a book club at the library, where I discovered that my opinions about literature were actually quite insightful when someone bothered to listen to them. I started taking long walks through different neighborhoods, exploring parts of Chicago I'd never seen despite living here most of my life. I went to museums on weekday mornings when they were quiet and peaceful. I bought myself flowers for no reason other than that they were beautiful. Small things, but they added up to something larger. A growing sense that I was a person worthy of care and attention, starting with my own. The change wasn't immediate or complete. There were days when I questioned everything I was doing, when the loneliness felt unbearable and the old patterns of self-sacrifice seemed like the only way back to connection with my family. There were nights when I lay in bed composing mentally texts to David, apologies and offerings of reconciliation that would put things back the way they were. But each time I came close to giving in, I remembered those receipts. I remembered the casual way David had dismissed my feelings and tried to make me responsible for his lies. I remembered Sarah's smooth insistence that I was making a big deal out of nothing, and I held firm. 3 months after that awful discovery, David called with news that should have melted my resolve. "Mom, I have something to tell you. Sarah's pregnant again. A baby. Another grandchild." The old me would have been over the moon with excitement and already planning how I could help with the expenses and the childcare and all the complicated logistics of raising children in an expensive city. But the new me felt something more complicated. Joy mixed with sadness. Love mixed with wariness. "Congratulations," I said. "When is the baby due?" "October. Listen, Mom, I know things have been weird between us lately, but this changes everything, right? I mean, we're going to need you. The kids are going to need their grandmother. Need me." There it was again. The assumption that my love could be taken for granted because it came disguised as necessity. "I hope the pregnancy goes smoothly," I said, "and I hope you're able to manage the expenses without any difficulties." A pause. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, I hope your budget can accommodate another child without requiring help from anyone else." "Mom, come on. You know we can't afford this on our own. The kids are already expensive, and now with another baby. Look, I'm willing to put our disagreement behind us if you are. We need to be a family again. We need to be a family again." As if the problem were our relationship status rather than his behavior. As if I could wave a magic wand and make myself forget everything I'd learned about how little they respected me. "We never stopped being family," I said. "But my idea of family includes honesty and respect. Yours seems to include lies and manipulation. God, Mom, you're never going to let this go, are you? So we spent some money on entertainment instead of groceries. Who cares? The groceries got bought anyway. You helped us. We had some fun. Everybody wins. Everybody wins. Except the person who was lied to and taken advantage of. Except the person whose savings were treated as a resource to be exploited, rather than a gift to be treasured." "David," I said, "do you think I'm stupid?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What? No, of course not. Then why did you lie to me? If you wanted money for entertainment, why not just ask for that honestly?" Because you would have said no. So you decided to override my right to make that decision by lying to me about why you needed the money. It's not like that. What is it like? Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Harder, more honest, in a way that wasn't entirely reassuring. "Look, Mom, you've always been willing to help with family expenses. We've got real financial pressure here. And yeah, sometimes we need to do things that help us relax and cope with that pressure. I didn't think you'd understand that, so I simplified the request. It wasn't malicious. As if good intentions could somehow retroactively transform lies into acceptable behavior. As if my inability to understand their sophisticated needs justified treating me like a fool. "And now?" I asked. "With another baby coming and all that financial pressure? What kind of help are you expecting from me this time?" "The usual, I guess. Help with medical expenses, getting the nursery set up, maybe some ongoing support with childcare costs. You know, the things grandmothers do. The things grandmothers do. Not out of love or joy or choice, but out of obligation, because that's what grandmothers do, as if we were all interchangeable parts in some vast machinery of family support." What if I said no? The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him. "Why would you say no? What if I said I wanted to use my money for my own needs and interests? What if I said I was tired of being taken for granted and lied to? What if I said I needed to see some real changes in how you treat me before I'd be willing to help with anything?" "Mom, I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. We've apologized for the misunderstanding about the money. Can't we just move past it? Misunderstanding. The lies and deception had been demoted to a mere misunderstanding, like getting someone's middle initial wrong on an envelope. You haven't apologized, I said. You've explained and justified and minimized, but you haven't actually apologized. Fine. I'm sorry we weren't more transparent about our expenses. Is that what you want to hear? Weren't more transparent. Even his apology was couched in language that avoided taking full responsibility. They weren't more transparent, as if transparency were a sliding scale rather than a simple matter of honesty versus lies. What I want, I said, is to be treated like a person whose feelings and intelligence matter. What I want is to be asked for help rather than manipulated into giving it. What I want is to have some kind of relationship with my family that isn't based entirely on what I can provide for them. That's not fair, Mom. We love you. How would I know? The question hung in the air between us. How would I know they loved me? When was the last time they'd called just to check on me? When was the last time they'd asked about my interests, my health, my hopes for the future? When was the last time they'd included me in their lives for any reason other than needing something from me? We invite you to things, David said finally. Birthday parties, holidays, where I cook and clean and provide free childcare while you socialize with people you actually enjoy spending time with. That's not. We include you in everything. You include my services in everything. There's a difference. I could hear him getting frustrated, his voice taking on that edge it got when he wasn't getting what he wanted easily enough. I don't know what you want from me, Mom. I can't change the past. I can't make everything perfect. But I'm trying to move forward here, and you're dwelling on ancient history. Ancient history. 3 months ago. What I want, I said, is for you to understand why I'm hurt. What I want is for you to care that you hurt me. What I want is some indication that you see me as something other than a source of money and free labor. Of course I see you as more than that. You're my mother. Then act like it. What does that mean? The fact that he had to ask told me everything I needed to know. He genuinely didn't understand what I was asking for because he'd never thought of me as having legitimate needs and feelings that deserved consideration. It means calling me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. It means asking how I'm doing and listening to the answer. It means including me in family decisions and treating my opinions like they matter. It means being honest with me even when honesty is inconvenient. That's a lot of demands, Mom. Demands. I was demanding that my son treat me with basic human respect. The fact that this seemed burdensome to him was probably all I needed to know about the future of our relationship. Those aren't demands, I said. They're the minimum requirements for a healthy relationship between adults. Look, I'll try to call more often, okay? And we'll be more careful about how we ask for help. But Mom, you've got to meet us halfway here. Sarah's pregnant. Money is going to be tight. And we're going to need support from family. That's just reality. Reality. The reality that my needs and feelings were secondary to their financial problems. The reality that forgiveness was something I owed them rather than something they needed to earn. The reality that love was measured in dollars and services rendered. Here's my reality, I said. I'm 72 years old, and I'm tired of being taken for granted. I'm tired of being lied to and manipulated and treated like an ATM with emotions. I'm tired of loving people who only seem to remember I exist when they need something. Mom, I'm not done. For the first time in the conversation, my voice was sharp enough to cut through his protests. I've spent decades putting your needs ahead of my own. I've given you money I couldn't afford to lose, time I'll never get back, and love that was never appreciated. And the thanks I got for all of that was being called boring and replaceable by strangers at my own birthday party. The silence that followed was the longest yet. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him calculating how to respond. What combination of manipulation and aggression might work to get this conversation back on track toward the outcome he wanted? So, what are you saying? He finally asked. You're cutting us off? You're abandoning your family because your feelings got hurt? Abandoning my family, as if I were the one who'd been failing at basic human decency. as if holding people accountable for their behavior were somehow equivalent to abandonment. I'm saying that being family doesn't give you the right to treat me badly. I'm saying that if you want my help and support, you need to start treating me like someone whose help and support are valuable gifts rather than automatic entitlements. And if we don't? If we can't live up to your new standards? The threat was implicit but clear. Shape up or lose access to your grandchildren. Restore the old dynamic or accept complete estrangement. Submit to continued exploitation or embrace total loneliness. Then I guess you'll figure out how to manage your finances and childcare without me, I said. The same way millions of other families do. Mom, I'm not cutting you off, David, but I'm not going to keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm either. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to have to be a real relationship, with mutual respect and consideration. If all you want is access to my money and services, then you're right. I'm not interested in that anymore. I hung up the phone before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been pride. Had I just ended my relationship with my only child? Had I chosen my dignity over my family? The questions churned in my mind as I sat in my quiet apartment, listening to the familiar sounds of the city outside my window. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else. A sense of relief so profound it was almost physical. For the first time in decades, I'd spoken my truth without softening it or apologizing for it. I'd set boundaries and maintained them despite emotional pressure to give in. I felt like myself again, bruised and scared and uncertain about the future. But myself. The phone didn't ring for 2 weeks. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. The silence felt both liberating and terrifying, proof that I'd been right about how little they valued me beyond my usefulness, but also confirmation that standing up for myself had real costs. Then, on a Thursday evening while I was reading in my chair by the window, the doorbell rang. Emma and Jake stood in the hallway, looking small and uncertain. Behind them, Sarah waited by the elevator with the kind of tense smile that suggested this visit hadn't been entirely voluntary. "Grandma Margaret!" Emma threw herself at my legs with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of childhood. Jake was more reserved, but he stepped forward for a hug when I opened my arms. The physical contact with my grandchildren was almost overwhelming. I'd missed them so much it felt like a constant ache, and holding them again reminded me exactly what I was risking by standing up to their parents. "We brought you a present," Jake said, producing a construction paper card decorated with crayon flowers. Inside, he'd written, "We miss you," in his careful 8-year-old handwriting. "We made cookies," Emma added, holding up a plastic container. "Mom helped, but we picked the recipe." I looked past them to Sarah, who was still hovering by the elevator as if she might need to make a quick escape. "Can they come in for a few minutes?" she asked. "They've been asking about you." I stepped aside to let the children into my apartment, but my eyes stayed on their mother. This felt like a test of some kind, though I wasn't sure what the right answer was supposed to be. "Have a seat," I said to Sarah. "Would you like some coffee?" "I can't stay long," she said. But she came into the apartment and settled awkwardly on my sofa while the children explored with the focused attention kids bring to spaces they haven't seen in a while. "Grandma, you got new flowers," Emma observed, pointing to the small arrangement I'd bought myself the previous weekend. "I did. Do you like them?" "They're pretty. Mom, can we get flowers for our house?" "We'll see," Sarah said automatically, then caught herself and added quickly, "Maybe we can pick some out next time we're at the store." The children chattered for a while about school and friends and the new baby coming, their voices filling my apartment with an energy I'd almost forgotten I missed. I made them cocoa and put their cookies on my best plates, treating their visit like the special occasion it felt like. But even as I enjoyed their presence, I was watching Sarah out of the corner of my eye. She seemed nervous, distracted, checking her phone repeatedly and making conversation that felt forced and unnatural. Finally, she stood up. "Kids, we need to head home. It's almost dinner time." "Already?" Emma protested. "We just got here." "We've been here almost an hour," Sarah said. "And Grandma Margaret probably has things she needs to do." I walked them to the door, accepting more hugs from the children and promises that they'd visit again soon. Sarah lingered for a moment after they headed toward the elevator. "They really have missed you," she said quietly. "This whole situation. It's been hard on them. It's been hard on everyone, I agreed. Margaret, I know you're angry with us. And maybe you have some valid points about things we could have handled better. But these are innocent children who love their grandmother. They don't understand why you've suddenly disappeared from their lives. The guilt hit exactly where she'd aimed it. I was hurting my grandchildren by standing up to their parents. I was depriving them of love and stability because I couldn't get over my wounded feelings. I haven't disappeared, I said carefully. But I also can't pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. So what do we do? How do we fix this? For a moment, I almost believed she was asking because she genuinely wanted to repair our relationship. But then I remembered that this was the same woman who'd smoothly insisted I was overreacting to being lied to and manipulated. Has David told you about our conversation 2 weeks ago? Sarah's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. He said you two had a disagreement about boundaries or expectations or something. He was pretty upset about it. Did he tell you what I asked for? Something about wanting different kinds of communication? I could see that David had filtered my requests through his own interpretation, reducing them to vague demands for more attention rather than acknowledging the fundamental disrespect I'd been trying to address. I asked for honesty, I said. I asked to be treated like a person whose feelings matter. I asked for some kind of relationship that isn't based entirely on what I can provide. Sarah looked uncomfortable. Margaret, I think maybe you're reading too much into things. We're all busy, and sometimes communication isn't perfect, but that doesn't mean we don't value you. There it was again. I was reading too much into being lied to and taken advantage of. My hurt feelings were evidence of my own oversensitivity, rather than a natural response to being treated poorly. Sarah, I said, if your friend borrowed money from you for groceries and then spent twice that amount on entertainment the same week, and you found out about it later, how would you feel? That's different. We're family. How is it different? Family helps each other. Family doesn't keep score. But family also doesn't lie to each other, does it? Family treats each other with respect? She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her working through the logic, trying to find a way to justify their behavior that didn't require acknowledging any wrongdoing. Look, she said finally, maybe we weren't as clear as we could have been about our financial situation, but you offered to help, and we needed help, and everything worked out fine. I don't see why it has to be this big dramatic thing. Dramatic. There was that word again, used to dismiss my legitimate feelings and make me responsible for the conflict their behavior had created. It's dramatic because you broke my trust, I said. It's dramatic because I realized I was being taken advantage of by people I love. It's dramatic because I don't know how to have a relationship with you that isn't built on deception. So what are you saying? You're never going to help us again? You're going to punish the kids because you're angry with us? The children were being used as leverage again, their innocent love weaponized against my need for basic respect. And the help, it was automatically expected, not requested. The question wasn't whether I wanted to help or whether they deserved help, but whether I was going to be difficult about providing it. I'm saying that I need to see some changes before I can trust you again. I need honest communication. I need to feel like I matter to you as a person, not just as a resource. I need to believe that you understand why I was hurt and that you're committed to not hurting me that way again. And until then, I'm taking care of myself. I'm building a life that doesn't depend on being needed by people who don't seem to particularly want me around, except when they need something. Sarah's face tightened. That's really unfair, Margaret. We do want you around. We've always included you in family events. Where I provide services, cooking, cleaning, childcare. When was the last time you invited me somewhere just to enjoy my company? The question hung in the air. I could see Sarah trying to remember, searching for an example that would prove me wrong, but we both knew she couldn't find one because it had never happened. We don't go places without the kids very often, she said finally. When we do family things, it's usually kid-focused. That's fine, but it means your relationship with me is entirely functional. I'm the grandmother, the babysitter, the cook, the emergency fund. I'm not a person you choose to spend time with because you enjoy my company. It's not that simple. Relationships are more complicated than that. Are they? Do you have friends you only call when you need favors? Do you invite people to dinner only when you need them to bring the food and cook it and clean it up afterward? Another silence. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to respond in a way that would get this conversation back on track toward reconciliation without requiring any actual acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Margaret, I think you're overthinking this. Families are just different from friendships. We have different expectations and obligations. Different expectations and obligations. Code for, you're supposed to give without expecting anything in return. And complaining about that makes you selfish. What obligations do you have toward me? I asked. The question seemed to genuinely puzzle her. What do you mean? You're talking about family obligations as if they only flow in one direction. What do you think you owe me as a member of this family? She was quiet for a long time, and I realized she'd probably never considered the question before. In her mind, family relationships were structured hierarchies where older generations served younger ones, where mothers and grandmothers existed to provide support and resources and unconditional love without expecting much in return. I don't know, she said finally. Respect, I guess. Inclusion. Love. Have you been including me and respecting me and showing me love? I think so. I mean, we've tried to. By lying to me about why you needed money. By calling me boring and inviting strangers to my birthday party? By treating me like hired help at family gatherings? Margaret, you're never going to forgive us, are you? You're going to hold this grudge forever and use it to justify cutting yourself off from people who love you. I could feel the conversation shifting, the way arguments do when one side realizes they can't win on the merits and starts trying to make the other side responsible for the conflict. I'm not holding a grudge, I said. I'm protecting myself from people who've shown me they can't be trusted to treat me well. By keeping us away from the kids? By making them suffer for things they had nothing to do with? There it was again. The children used as weapons. The assumption that my need for respect was somehow selfish if it interfered with their parents' convenience. The kids are welcome here anytime you want to bring them, I said. But I'm not going to pretend that everyone is fine so you can continue taking advantage of me. We're not taking advantage of you. Then prove it. Show me what this relationship looks like when it's not based on what I can provide. Call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. Include me in decisions instead of just informing me about the consequences. Ask for help instead of manipulating me into giving it. And if we do all that, then you'll go back to helping us financially? The question revealed everything I needed to know about her priorities. All of this, the visit with the children, the conversation about communication, the tentative gestures toward acknowledging my hurt feelings, was about restoring access to my resources. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. If I believe the changes are real and lasting, if I feel like I'm being asked rather than expected or manipulated, if I trust that my feelings about how the help is given and received actually matter to you, that's a lot of conditions. They're the same conditions I'd require for any relationship with anyone. Honesty, respect, reciprocity. They're not special burdens I'm imposing on you because I'm bitter. They're basic human expectations. Sarah gathered her purse and moved toward the door. I'll talk to David. Maybe we can figure something out. Sarah, I said as she reached for the doorknob, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to survive. She looked back at me with something that might have been surprise. Survive? Do you know what it feels like to love people who only seem to see you as useful? Do you know what it does to you over time? To realize that your feelings don't matter to the people whose feelings matter most to you? For a moment, her expression softened, and I thought maybe she was beginning to understand. But then she shook her head. I think you're being more dramatic about this than it needs to be. But I'll talk to David, and maybe we can all sit down together and work something out. After she left, I sat in my chair by the window and tried to sort through my emotions. The visit with my grandchildren had been wonderful and painful at the same time, a reminder of everything I was missing, but also an illustration of why I couldn't simply give in to the pressure to resume the old patterns. The conversation with Sarah had been frustrating but clarifying. She genuinely didn't understand what I was asking for, or why being treated with basic respect should be a precondition for continued financial support. In her mind, family relationships were supposed to be unconditional on my end and transactional on theirs. I thought about the life I'd been building over the past few months, the pottery classes that had taught me I was better with my hands than I'd expected, the book club where my opinions were valued and discussed, the walks through unfamiliar neighborhoods that had shown me how much of my own city I'd never explored. Small things, but they added up to something I'd thought was lost forever, a sense of myself as an interesting, worthwhile person, independent of my usefulness to others. Did I want to give that up? Did I want to go back to being defined entirely by my relationships with people who couldn't be bothered to see me as fully human? The answer, I realized, was no. Whatever happened with David and Sarah and the grandchildren, I couldn't go back to being the woman who existed only to serve other people's needs. I couldn't return to the invisible life I'd been living. I'd found myself again, and I wasn't willing to lose her a second time. 2 days later, David called. His voice was different. Less entitled, more careful. The conversation with Sarah had apparently made some impression on him. "Mom, can we talk? Really talk, I mean. Not like last time." "I'm listening." "Sarah told me about your conversation, about what you're asking for, and I've been thinking about how things have been between us." I waited, not wanting to make this easier for him if he was going to take a shortcut to absolution without ever passing through genuine understanding. "I think maybe I haven't been very good at seeing your perspective on things. And maybe some of the ways we've been asking for help haven't been as respectful as they should have been. Maybe. Some of the ways." Phrases designed to acknowledge fault without accepting full responsibility. But it was more than I'd heard from him before. What does that mean specifically? It means a long pause. It means I lied to you about why we needed money, and that was wrong. It means I've been treating you like your time and resources were automatically available whenever we needed them, without considering that you might have your own plans and priorities. It means I haven't been calling you enough, or asking about your life enough, or making you feel like you matter to us outside of crisis situations. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd been practicing them, but they were the right words, and he was saying them without deflection or justification. It was a start. "Thank you," I said. "That helps me understand that you see what the problems have been. I do see them, and I want to fix them. I want us to have a better relationship. What does that look like to you?" "I don't know exactly. I guess calling you more often just to check in, including you in decisions about the kids, asking your opinion about things, being more honest about our financial situation and what we're asking you to help with. And what about the new baby?" Another pause. This was the real test, I knew. Whether his newfound awareness would hold up when confronted with actual financial pressure and genuine need. "We're going to need help," he said finally. "I won't lie about that. But I want to ask for it differently. I want to be honest about what we need and why, and give you the choice to say yes or no without making you feel guilty if you choose no. And if I do choose no sometimes, then we'll figure out another way. Like you said, millions of families manage without help from grandparents. It might be harder, but we'll make it work." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with David making commitments about communication and respect that sounded genuine, if tentative. He asked about my pottery classes and my book club, listening to my answers with what seemed like real interest rather than polite obligation. When we hung up, I felt cautiously optimistic. He could have been telling me what he thought I wanted to hear, but the tone felt different. More adult somehow. More like he was talking to another person, rather than managing a difficult resource. Over the next few weeks, he followed through on some of his promises. He called twice just to chat, with no requests or crises to discuss. He sent me pictures of the kids and updates about the pregnancy. When he did ask for help, with a few $100s for maternity clothes Sarah needed, he was straightforward about it, explaining exactly what they needed the money for and how it would be used. It felt like progress. Small, uncertain progress, but progress nonetheless. The real test came in late August, when Sarah was hospitalized with complications during her 7th month of pregnancy. David called me in a panic, his voice tight with worry and exhaustion. "Mom, I need help. Sarah's in the hospital. The doctors don't know if the baby is going to be okay, and I can't manage the kids and work and everything else by myself." The crisis was real, and his need was genuine. This wasn't about entertainment expenses disguised as emergencies. This was the kind of situation where family members step up for each other without question. "What do you need?" I asked. "Could you take the kids for a few days? Maybe through the weekend? I want to stay at the hospital as much as possible, and they're scared and confused, and I don't know how to help them while dealing with all this medical stuff." "Of course. Do you want me to pick them up, or can you bring them over?" "I'll bring them over in about an hour if that's okay. And Mom, thank you. I know I haven't given you much reason to help us lately, but I really appreciate it." That weekend, I had Emma and Jake to myself for the first time since this whole conflict began. Without their parents as intermediaries, I was able to see how much they'd missed me and how confused they'd been by my sudden absence from their lives. "Grandma Margaret," Emma said on Friday evening as I tucked her into my bed. She was too scared to sleep alone on the couch. "Why did you stop coming to our house?" It was a child's question, direct and honest in a way adult questions rarely are. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that their parents were taking advantage of you without making them feel responsible or frightened? "Sometimes adults have disagreements about how to treat each other," I said carefully. "Your mom and dad and I needed some time to figure out how to be better to each other." "Are you better now?" "We're working on it." "Good. I missed you a lot." "I missed you too, sweetheart." Over the course of that weekend, I remembered why I'd been willing to sacrifice so much for this family in the first place. Not because of obligation or guilt or some misplaced sense of duty, but because I genuinely loved these children and wanted to be part of their lives. But I also realized that my love for them didn't have to come at the expense of my own dignity and self-respect. I could take care of them without accepting disrespect from their parents. I could be a grandmother without being a doormat. When David came to pick up the kids on Sunday afternoon, he looked exhausted but relieved. Sarah and the baby were both stable, though she'd have to remain on bed rest for the duration of the pregnancy. "Mom, I can't tell you how much this helped. The kids had a great time. I could focus on Sarah without worrying about them, and I don't know how we would have managed without you." "How are you planning to manage the bed rest situation?" I asked. "I don't know yet. Sarah's mom might be able to come for a week or two, but she's got her own health problems. I might have to take some unpaid leave from work, or we might have to hire help we can't afford." He was clearly hoping I'd offer to step in, but he didn't ask directly. And I appreciated that restraint, that acknowledgement that my help was a gift rather than an entitlement. "I could take the kids most afternoons after school," I offered. "At least through the week. They'd have to take the bus to my apartment instead of going home. But they could do homework here and have dinner, and you could pick them up in the evenings." The relief on his face was immediate and profound. "That would be amazing. Are you sure?" "I know it's a big commitment." "I'm sure. But David, I need this to be a real partnership. I need you to check in about how it's going, ask if I need anything, be flexible if I occasionally have other plans. I need to feel like a person whose time and energy are valuable, not just someone whose availability is assumed." "Absolutely. And Mom, I want to pay you something for this. I know you're refusing the money, but childcare is expensive, and you'd be providing a real service that would otherwise cost us a lot." I was surprised by the offer, mostly because it suggested he was beginning to understand that my help had monetary value, even when it was freely given. "Let's see how it goes," I said. "Right now, I just want to help with a difficult situation, but thank you for thinking about it that way." The arrangements worked well for everyone. The children adjusted quickly to the after-school routine, and I enjoyed their presence without feeling like it was being imposed on me. David checked in regularly. Sarah called to thank me when she was feeling up to it, and I maintained enough control over the situation to avoid feeling taken advantage of. When baby Thomas was born in early October, healthy and perfect despite the scary months of pregnancy, I was at the hospital within hours, holding my newest grandchild and feeling the pure, uncomplicated joy that comes with new life. Over the next few months, I developed a relationship with my son's family that felt entirely different from what we'd had before. Not perfect, and not without occasional setbacks, but based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's contributions. David kept his word about calling more often and including me in decisions about the children. Sarah made an effort to see me as a person rather than just a convenient resource. The children, relieved to have their grandmother back in their lives, were more affectionate and open than they'd been in years, and when they did need help, financial or otherwise, they asked for it directly and honestly, without manipulation or guilt trips. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no, and both responses were accepted with grace and understanding. It wasn't the same as before, and it never would be. Too much had happened for us to return to the old patterns of unquestioned giving and casual taking, but it was better. It was real. I kept up with my pottery classes and my book club and my long walks through the city. I maintained the life I'd built for myself during those months of estrangement, because I'd learned that having my own interests and activities made me a more interesting person to be around, and more importantly, a happier person to be. I still helped my family, but I did it from a position of strength rather than desperation. I gave because I chose to give, not because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. And that made all the difference. As winter settled over Chicago and the new year approached, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago, invisible, exhausted, taken for granted, and slowly disappearing into other people's needs. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, someone I'd once known but had lost touch with long ago. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been months of loneliness and uncertainty, difficult conversations and painful realizations about people I loved. There had been moments when I'd questioned everything I was doing and wondered if standing up for myself was worth the cost. But as I sat in my apartment on New Year's Eve, listening to fireworks over the lake and thinking about the year to come, I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd chosen dignity over convenience, self-respect over false peace. I'd refused to disappear quietly into old age and irrelevance. I'd saved myself, and in doing so, I'd saved my relationships too. Not all of them, and not in the way I'd originally hoped, but in ways that were more honest and sustainable than what I'd had before. The phone rang just before midnight. David's voice, warm and slightly drunk on champagne. "Happy New Year, Mom. I just wanted to call and tell you I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. And Mom, thank you for everything this year, for standing up to us when we needed to be stood up to, for not giving up on us even when we probably deserved it, for teaching us how to treat you better." After we hung up, I poured myself a small glass of wine and raised it in a toast to the woman in the mirror, older, wiser, and finally visible again after so many years of disappearing. The L train rattled past my window, carrying its cargo of late-night revelers and early-morning workers, all of them with stories of their own about love and loss and the courage it takes to change your life when change seems impossible. I was one of those stories now, not the victim of other people's selfishness, but the hero of my own rescue. Not the woman who gave everything away, but the woman who learned to keep enough for herself. The city sparkled outside my window, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in it. Not as someone's convenient resource, but as Margaret, a woman with her own dreams and interests and value. A woman who'd learned that the best gift you can give someone is teaching them how to treat you with respect. And the best gift you can give yourself is refusing to accept anything less. That birthday party with strangers eating my food while my son called me boring felt like it had happened to someone else. In a way, it had. It had happened to the woman I used to be, before I remembered that I was worth more than my usefulness. Now, when I think about turning 73 next month, I'm already planning how I want to celebrate. A small dinner with people who chose to be there because they enjoy my company. Maybe David and Sarah and the grandchildren, if we're all still doing well with our new way of relating to each other. Maybe my friends from book club and pottery class, people who see me, people who value me, people who know that Margaret is more than just someone's mother or grandmother or convenient solution to various problems. I am a woman who has lived 7 decades on this earth, who has loved and been hurt and found the strength to demand better. I am a woman who has learned to make beautiful things with clay, who has opinions about books that matter to other people, who has discovered that the city she's lived in most of her life still has surprises to offer. I am a woman who survived her own life and came out the other side more herself than ever. And if my story sounds familiar to you, If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own experience with family members who take more than they give and treat your kindness like it's their right rather than your choice, then I want you to know something. You are worth more than your usefulness. You deserve respect and consideration and genuine affection from the people you love. You have the right to set boundaries and maintain them, even when doing so is difficult or lonely. It's never too late to start being the hero of your own story, instead of the victim of someone else's selfishness. It's never too late to remember that love should add to your life, not subtract from it. It's never too late to save yourself. The snow is beginning to fall outside my window as I finish telling you this story, and the city is growing quiet in that particular way it does when winter settles in for the night. Tomorrow I have pottery class, and lunch with Mrs. Alvarez, and a new mystery novel I've been looking forward to starting. Small pleasures, maybe, but they're mine. Chosen by me, for me, because I've finally learned that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. And sometimes, it's revolutionary. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or known someone who has? Feeling invisible in your own family? Taken for granted by people who should love you most? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your relationships? Share your story in the comments if you feel comfortable doing so. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward finding the courage to change them. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or remember something you needed to remember, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and you never know whose life might be touched by hearing that they're not the only one who's walked this difficult path, because no story of survival should ever be told in silence, and no one should have to face these challenges alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, you are worth so much more than what you can provide for other people. You are worth love that doesn't come with conditions attached. You are worth respect that doesn't have to be purchased with your time and money and energy. You are worth seeing and being seen for exactly who you are. Never forget that, and never let anyone convince you otherwise.